Picture yourself having a peaceful time walking through the Nevada desert. The soothing sounds of a cooling breeze blowing through the dry grass. The call of some distant birds echoing in the canyons. The fresh air and warm sunshine just offering a sense of serenity. You didn't bring much with you. Some water, some odds and ends, and a couple joints stuffed away in your backpack. You lean down to grab a couple of them and you notice on the dirt between the grass a trail of tacky blood. You stand up and look around to see if you can find where it came from, and you're not quite sure what it is you're looking at. You see a man standing there, palms to the sky, jumping and screaming. Your first instinct is that he needs help, but it only takes a moment to realize something is very wrong. Yes, this man's screaming, but not in desperation, but in jubilation. He's nude and covered head to toe in blood. Whatever this is, you need to get as far away from this person as possible. To say Richard Trenton Chase was a deeply troubled, dangerously deranged, violent, paranoid schizophrenic doesn't do justice to the story or the absolute levels of depravity he inflicted upon his victims. He wasn't cunning or manipulative like a Ted Bundy. He wasn't eccentric and boisterous like a Richard Ramirez. He was a ghoulish, natural force of darkness. His obsessive delusions inspired peers and eventually journalists to give him the very fitting nickname, the Vampire of Sacramento. Forewarning to this episode, it gets pretty gruesome. So here's your warning. Little baby Richie was born a Sacramento native into a middle-class family in 1950. His early life was relatively unremarkable. Except by the age of 5, this little bundle of depravity had already met all 3 criteria of the McDonald Triad, which is a set of behaviors and factors that is argued to provide a correlated predictor to violent or sociopathic behavior. Small-scale studies conducted by psychiatrists Daniel Hellman and Nathan Blackman, and notable FBI agents John E. Douglas and Robert Ressler, along with Ann Burgos, claimed substantial evidence for the association of these childhood patterns with later predatory and social behavior. The 3 behaviors in question are pyromania, excessive and persistent bedwetting, and animal cruelty or zoophilia. Not necessarily in that order, and hopefully not at the same time. But like in general. In early adulthood, it was pretty obvious Chase was not exactly normal in the gray matter. He was a hypochondriac, believing his heart would suddenly stop beating, or that someone had stolen one of his organs. Ever-intensifying delusions being fueled by his hemophilic obsessions, believing his blood was acidic, or that he didn't have enough of it. This led to a lifelong series of institutionalizations, where he was diagnosed with a schizophrenic disorder and an unusual form of pica known as Rensfield syndrome, stemming from an incident in one of his stays where staff found he had eaten a bird that landed in the window of his room. He told doctors he believed it was a gift to restore his blood. Chase was, you could say, ahead of the curve on the whole self-prescribed wellness trip. He believed doctors were wrong, and the issue came down to him not having enough blood. He even came up with a treatment. He developed the habit of adopting or buying bunny rabbits, draining them, even going as far as to use a blender to consume them. He also began with other ways of correcting himself, broadly with narcotics and psychedelics, specifically LSD and psilocybin, which are known to cause auditory and visual hallucinations and have been shown in studies to treat a variety of psychological conditions, as well as make it really hard to cross the street. But for someone like Chase, a violently delusional paranoid schizophrenic with a sexual fascination with blood, it was surprisingly not a great idea. Chase's erratic behavior continued to escalate. Because it was the 1970s and everyone was too hopped up on cocaine and disco, he was able to buy a gun. He was detained by tribal authorities in Nevada after he was found screaming naked on a hill covered in blood. When his vehicle was searched, they found 3 full buckets of blood, which turned out to be cow blood. They never did discover where it came from, and unfortunately they had nothing to charge him with, because it's technically illegal to cover yourself with blood, stand nude on a hill, and jump up and down. He'd also taken to walking his neighborhood with his gun on full display, looking in people's windows, and standing on their doorstep, and if the door was locked, he'd simply walk away. One woman who had an encounter with Chase, standing at her back screen door, said it was like he didn't see me. Almost like he was looking to buy a used car or something like that. Alright, we're at the point now, if you're squeamish or uncomfortable with descriptions of violence and gore, at this point I'd recommend jumping to the timestamp listed here, because it's gonna get really fucking dark. Alright folks, pour yourself a drink and let's tell the story. Chase had become so disconnected from reality, he had begun injecting rabbit's blood into his veins. This caused him to develop sepsis and become violently ill, ending up with him being committed involuntarily to a mental health facility. After receiving treatment, he was deemed no longer a threat and was released to the custody of his mother. His mother helped him get an apartment with some roommates, but because of his erratic and odd behavior, eventually the 3 roommates left, leaving him behind on his own. With his mother's help, he weaned himself off the medication meant to help control his schizophrenic behaviors. With his delusions unchecked, his paranoia unhindered, Richard embarked on a weeks-long rampage of deranged depravity. In 1977, Richard Chase claimed his first known victim. A 51-year-old father of 2 standing in front of his home was shot in a drive-by shooting. The victim's family was interviewed by police, even bringing in a hypnotist, because it was the 1970s and that was a thing they did. The son identified the car. Unfortunately, he described it as a Mercury, while Chase drove a Ranchero, so the only lead went cold. 2 weeks later, Chase attempted to enter the home of a woman, but found the door locked. He would later tell investigators that if he found a locked door, it meant he was unwelcome, and he would leave. He was caught breaking and entering into another house, and chased out by the father of the family after Chase had pilfered some of their belongings. When the police investigated, they found that Chase had urinated and defecated in the toddler's bed and his dresser drawers. His next victim was a 22-year-old pregnant housewife. Chase entered the home while the woman hung laundry. He sat down and began watching television. He shot her with his .22 that he had used in the drive-by. Chase then began dissecting her, disemboweling her, and draining her blood. He collected it in a yogurt cup and greedily drank the viscous fluid. He performed necrophilic acts on the corpse and then left. She was discovered later that day by her husband. Chase had not left any evidence. It was not identified as a potential suspect. At this point, though, signs were starting to link up that many of these incidents were connected. Police responded to a nearby burglary, which had been done within the same time frame. At the scene, the disemboweled remains of a dog had been discovered. An FBI profile was done of Chase, and it matched him to the letter. Agent Robert Ressler became involved in the investigation, providing insight into the modus operandi of the killer. However, it didn't stop the savagery that was about to come. On January 27, 1978, just 4 days after he'd killed the pregnant housewife, Chase found Evelyn Marath's door unlocked. Along with Evelyn was her 6-year-old son Jason, her nephew David, and a friend of the family named Dan Meredith. Chase shot Dan in the back of the head in the hallway, his body thudding hard to the ground. Chase then flipped the body and stole the wallet and keys off of it, before proceeding into the rest of the house. Evelyn and Jason were found in the bedroom. The 6-year-old had 2 shots to the head at point-blank range. Evelyn had been partially cannibalized. She was disemboweled, and it seemed that Chase had made a crude attempt to take out one of her eyes. On top of that, the corpse had been sodomized. The 22-month-old's crib was found smeared with blood, with a bullet hole through the pillow. The remains were found in a box in an abandoned parking lot, decapitated and partially cannibalized. The scene was absolutely brutal. It shocked and terrified the community. The investigation was without a solid lead. That was until by random chance, a witness came forward to tell how an old classmate of hers had bumped into her recently, and she was concerned for him because he seemed very unstable and had dried blood on his sweatshirt. During the conversation, police began to realize that this classmate, named Richard Trenton Chase, fit the profile and lived within 1 mile of all the locations. Police staked out his apartment, and when he arrived, he was forcibly detained. Entering the residence was like entering a nightmare. The apartment floor, walls, and ceiling were coated in a sticky layer of partially congealed blood. 3 blenders sat on the counter, containing dried blood and bits of fur. The door to the appliances, the sink, the plates, the utensils, they were all similarly coated. They found the .22 that was linked to all of the murders, a 12-inch butcher knife that matched the wounds on Evelyn and the housewife, rubber boots, dog collars, and a blood-smeared calendar with the dates of all the murders circled. Chase was immediately arrested and charged with 6 counts of first-degree murder, burglary, desecration of a corpse, animal cruelty, and a litany of other charges. His defense offered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. And while Chase was obviously insane, the plea is only valid if it determines culpability. The jury decided that because of forethought he put into his actions and his attempts to mislead the investigation, that he was guilty. He was sentenced to execution. So what moral can we take from this story? The tragic tale of a disturbed man slipping through the cracks? A cautionary tale about the dangers of neglecting psychological conditions? I think the moral to take is lock your fucking doors. If someone is coming to see you, they should call a minimum of 3 times. Once to set up the initial plans, once to make sure the plans are still on, and a 3rd time to bail on those plans so you can take off your pants and get back to staring mindlessly at Reddit. Thank you so much. Please remember to like, subscribe, comment, share this video around. Until next time, guys and girls, a toodaloo.